Why, hello there. Didn't see you come in. Welcome to Watches Tonight. I am Tim Mosso. This is my friend Matt. Armin has the night off, and we are going to be talking about dress watches. So this evening, the death of the dress watch. Is it overstated or is it a thing? We chat live, and I share your wrist shots tonight on Watches Tonight. And while we're warming up, do me a favor and check out my Instagram, Tim_Mosso, where you can find out more about the miniature car dealership behind me and see a video of my pug falling off a curb while doing a dance on his back. It's a fun insight into the life of Tim Mosso, and of course there are lots of watches. While we warm up, Mark S. from Brooklyn is in the box, Arto Charles from New York City, Abdul from Germany, AD Never Calling, Tack, we got Andrew T, we got G Mood, we got Jeff S, Oliver G, and we got Phil from Park City, Utah. We got Miroslav joining in from Europe. We are Venom. We've got Sashi joining in from London, staying up late with us in GMT. Frank, Russell, Kunal, Armand. Hey, if you're in the chat box, you could have been here tonight, cheater. All right.
It's giving me a shot.
We're getting ready to rock. We got J&M from Hanover, Pennsylvania, a local boy. Okay, viewer wrist shots. Let's lead off. Why don't you take us through the wrist shots right here? Lead us off, Matt.
Sure. So we've got Russell leading off in the with the UK member meetup of the Talking Time with Tim Mosso Facebook group.
That's right. Cheers, fellas.
That's right. Jeff S. is a man of many machines, big and small, with cars and his IWC Ingenieur Perpetual. Talk and his Blancpain Bathyscaphe flyback chrono check in from the Colosseum in Rome. That's
very slick.
That is a very, very cool shot. Nishant P., an esteemed client of mine and a friend. Hope he's watching tonight. Florida shares his stunning MB&F and Bulgari Serpenti, obviously. I know.
Yeah, after many, many generations of collecting them as like objet not to be worn, men finally have a Serpenti they can wear.
And it looks good on the wrist, Nishant. Daniel A. showcases his Debatoon DB27, sourced from Victor at the 1916 company.
Thank you for trusting our team.
That's right. And Mohammed I from Bahrain represents Vacheron Constantin with his overseas chronograph Generation 1, also bought from the 1916 company from Amar at the small but excellent Saudi Arabian branch of our company.
I think he's got a Swiss watch and a Cuban cigar in that shot. We do in fact have a small office in Saudi Arabia, so if you're interested, we can always connect you there. Okay, are dress watches dead or dying? I've got opinions on this, you've got opinions on this, but let's just state the facts right out of the gate. The Omega DeVille, the Rolex Cellini, the Audemars Piguet Code 1159, any Longa that's not a limited edition or an Odysseus, what do they all have in common? Each is the product of a successful mass market brand, and yet each struggles to compete with the in-house sports watch options from the same brands. Speedmasters, Seamasters, Submariners, GMTs, Daytonas, Royal Oaks, they're absolutely everywhere, but even juggernaut-sized marketing budgets seem to fall short when trying to elevate these dress watches to the top of the page. They're never the headliners at these brands. I mean, let's face it, can we even name like a current Tag Heuer or Breitling dress watch?
So if you're going to stretch into the sports category, you have to. It's really tough to know for everybody in our own individual way where the dress watch ends and the sports watch begin.
Okay.
Because I could say maybe the Premier.
Maybe, but isn't that still 100 meters water
I know.
resistant?
You talk about the. It's got a chronograph in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
I know. And obviously the Navitimer is even a worse, example of it. But
yeah.
I don't know. There's some leather strap options where
Tag Heuer Link maybe.
So
on the
so look
side?
at what I've got on today.
Okay.
Vacheron Corne de Vache in steel. Armin and I know he's skipping out on the show today, but we were having this conversation earlier.
That's a real dress watch.
He said it wasn't. He said it's steel and it's a chronograph, so there's no way. And I said this is a dress piece. So this just is an example of, I don't know, the definitions tend to blur.
I think that's Vacheron trying to stretch a dress model rather than Vacheron trying to create a more elegant sports watch.
Sure.
Like, I agree with Armand, this is the sportiest version of the 5000 reference. I don't think this is a sports watch. But guys, let us know. Can you take a dress watch, build it in steel, and immediately call it a sports watch? Is that enough? Let us know.
Armin saying it's a casual watch. So he has 3 categories: dress, sport, and casual.
Okay.
Which is 90% of all watches, I would say.
That's like Ducati saying like, okay, well, you've got the 996, and then you've got the Monster, and the Monster is a standard. It's the motorcycle for all times. It's for casual riding. And that's the Ducati Monster. There you go. That the steel Corne de Vache. It's not a full-on utilitarian commuter, but, it's not a 996. Okay, so here's the other thing about that watch. It does beg the question, does Vacheron have any sports watches other than the Overseas?
I think so. My pause is I'm racking my mind, but I think everything is dress.
I think
everything else is dress. I think your historiques. I think your traditionnel. I think your patrimony. I think even moving back into discontinued lines, I would lean more dress on those pieces.
Yeah, I mean, you can get a steel 56. That's not a problem. I don't think that's a sports watch.
Sure.
The last sports watch Vacheron made. We're off on a tangent here, but hey, that's why we're doing this. It was the short-lived 100-meter water-resistant steel Calatrava. Like, for the brief period when you could get a watch that was steel, automatic, 100 meters, and fully loomed, Vacheron had 2 sports watches going.
And I see that often in our inventory on a rubber strap, and I am very jealous of the owners of those pieces.
It is a very desirable
They're
watch.
very cool. And also, of course, within the historique line, we have the 222, which... I don't know. That's not a line. That's a single piece, but it is probably considered a sport watch.
45 years ago, that was a sports watch.
Okay.
Today, 50 meters, push-down crown, not a swimmable. I'm not sure it's the same.
Here we go.
It's like, there was a time when the Royal Oak Jumbo was a sports watch. I don't think it is anymore. There was a time when the Reverso was a sports watch. I don't. Well, other than the short-lived and abortive Squadras.
Yes, the Squadra.
Although I will say this, the Grand Sports are very good.
Yeah.
The Grand Sports were great watches. But that sort of takes us to the problem that we've got with introducing new successful dress watch lines today. They're generally not successful. The Calatrava started as a dress watch that nobody wanted. And then in recent years, we had the Clé de Cartier in 2015. They hoped that the quirky crown would make this the new Ballon Bleu, but it didn't. Same year, Vacheron launches the Harmony, going back to the well with the non-round tonneau-style dress watches. And yet, no one was interested. The Code 1159 in 2019, okay, this is like the Hall of Fame now, but the AP long-promised Jules Audemars replacement never lived up to the billing or the anticipation. It became a niche watch instead of the multi-thousand seller they thought it could be. So why is it so hard to launch a successful dress watch model line from a big brand with a budget?
So when I think about this, I don't think as much about the new model line. I think the true new model line is few and far between. I think about Patek Philippe introducing new complications, introducing new grand complications, introducing new references that are hits, that are incredible, that people will line up at the door for, despite the major price tag.
A few examples for like the audience out there so they can follow your thinking.
Sure. So, I mean, you have classics like a 5205, a 5905. You have the new introductions this year like the hobnail, I don't know, the 6159 maybe.
So what you're saying basically is that, the 6159, the perpetual calendar.
The smoked sapphire,
I love that,
hobnail perpetual, right. So what I'm thinking is, I don't think of it as much of a company introducing a fully new line of dress watches. I think of companies, a Vacheron, a Lange, a Patek, etc., bringing out great additions to pre-existing collections.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the challenge. I don't think anyone would dispute that Calatravas and Tanks and like Reversos, they do well because they're part of established collections. I think it's almost though, it's a little bit like the Rolling Stones and Ozzy Osbourne picking up Grammys for rock and metal. It's like, where are the new bands that can win these awards? Like, is rock that dead, like dress watches? I think rock and roll and dress watches, believe it or not, they sort of go together. Like, neither one is still considered to be the headliner. Like, rock is never going to headline Lollapalooza ever again. And dress watches are never going to be as popular as sports watches ever again. And I do agree with you. You can launch a successful dress watch, like, we'll get onto that, but I think, like, for example, that 6159, it's going to be very successful. More than that, though, the 6196, the new Calatrava. Like Calatrava, there's a forever collection.
So Patek's releases this year, and again, tangents, excuse me, I know we talked about
it's
VC
okay.
earlier, but Patek's, we all sat around the office when those pieces came out and said they are really playing the hits. They're really, whether it's the 8-day movement, with the textured dial, whether it's, like we said, the smoked sapphire perpetual, whether it's the 6196, which I mean, time only, quote unquote salmon dial or rose opaline dial in a platinum case with blackened hands and indices. I mean, it was money across the board.
It's very manipulative. It manipulates our hearts.
It does.
No, I totally agree with you on that front. I think what's interesting here is that Patek had a fascinating notion of discontinuing the 5711 because they didn't want to become like the Royal Oak Company over in Le Sentier. But I also think maybe that was less about protecting the bigger corporate brand than it was sort of a smokescreen, because we got the 5811 a year later. We got the rest of the Nautilus collection still in circulation. We've got all the Aquanauts. I think that was making room for the Cubitus to be the steel sports watch.
I agree with you on that front. I also think, and maybe I'm in the minority here, the 5711 discontinuation was a huge nothing burger to me.
Yeah,
they weren't discontinuing the Nautilus, they discontinued one reference, and then they brought it back shortly after in an upgraded, with an upgraded package and a white gold case and bracelet. So I think that really was, yes, I do think it was to make room for the Cubitus. I think it was a lot to say, oh, look at us, look what we're doing, but really they had, how many other Nautiluses still in the catalog?
So I think with Patek, what you've got is, you don't want the brand, including the dress watches, to be subsumed to one sports watch model line, but it is telling that the first really large-scale full line release that they've come out with in recent years is the Cubitus, not some sort of dress watch.
Sure.
Like most of the new debuts, you talked about the 5205, the 5905, especially the steel one, which is a really great watch. But how those all sort of fit into existing collections, whereas Cubitus is freestanding, like Nautilus, like Aquanaut. And it's one of those Patek, families that gets a name. Yeah. Like it's a rare and special Patek Philippe watch that gets a name rather than an alphanumeric.
Sure.
So let's see what people are saying in the chat box now, because this is the interactive part of the show. Okay, so a lot going on. Armin's in the box, by the way. We're kind of tripling up here. He's like the absent man, but he's here in spirit. So Jeff's talking about the 222 being the other VC sports watch. Russell Hyam is saying the same thing. Does VC need another sports watch when they have the sports watch? Jeff S is saying the 222. He also believes that's a sports watch. He said, I think that's a very sporty dress watch by modern standards, until you can swim with it. We got Renside joining in the box, Truman Burbank. We've got Aiken Watson saying, agree with Jeff S. Grand Seiko almost always does both dress and sports watches well at the same time. And we got a comment, Tim, I just got my Grail 5015. You're the man.
Very cool.
Mr. Onair, congratulations. Ken Wood saying, the 1921 American may not be a sports watch, but it is a great sports car watch. How do we feel? Do we think that that's a driver's watch? Do we believe the urban legend?
So I've heard that it's a preacher's watch.
Really?
Yeah, I've heard that there was a special order from a preacher who would be giving a sermon or some sort of presentation at the church, I guess a sermon, and would have his hands at an angle where he'd want to see the time on his wrist, and it would be easier to read with the dial oriented that way. So the lore continues. I don't know.
That's opening up like an entirely new front in the folklore. Yeah. Has anyone else heard that it was a preacher's watch?
I bet a couple people out there have. Yeah.
Where was this church? Like Aspen? That the preacher
somewhere
had
in America. No, I heard it was an American preacher, and obviously the prevailing wisdom is that it's a driver's watch. But I had heard this story.
No, but like a preacher getting a Vacheron, was this like the church of East Hampton?
Vacheron's been around a long time. The church has been around a long time.
I guess
America has been around a long time.
Fun fact: when I was in high school, we had this Catholic forensic league where we did all the speech and debate, and the brothers who ran the order that oversaw the whole league, they got an indulgence in the yearly budget at Chaminade and Kellenberg. And so one guy was really into Mont Blanc pens, and there was a budget line item to allow him to get a couple of Mont Blanc pens. They didn't want them to be so deprived that they were miserable. So I don't know, maybe after a couple of years you could get them to buy you a Vacheron.
You never know.
A couple of Meisterstücks, you know what I mean? Just trade those in, go without for a few years and get the Vacheron. So, now, interesting thing about dress watches today is that we were just saying, the only real successes appear to be either additions to ancient model lines like Calatrava, like the Reverso, like the Cartier tank, or independence? We're going to talk about that in a moment, but viewer wrist shots number 2, Brian S. finds stop-and-go traffic less tiresome with his Rolex Datejust 41 and Volvo C40 out on the road. Interesting. I'm guessing this is a UK shot because the steering wheel appears to be on the right. We got Pavan B, who has all the best toys on the road with a Patek Philippe 5235R, which I adore, and BMW. I'd like to know more about the BMW, so please, Pavan, if you're in the box, let me know. Dan Kane is Glasuta Original, Senator 60s Chrono. He's reporting from the world's largest cuckoo clock in Ohio. I believe it's Sugar Creek, Ohio. Now, I thought for sure this was going to be like Switzerland or Germany, but it's actually the American Midwest.
There you go.
Full of surprises, USA. We got Ryan M, who proves that independent watchmaking doesn't need to cost Journe money with a lovely Stefan Kudoka. Well done.
A dress watch.
That's a dress watch,
Yep.
but we're going to actually elaborate on this in just a moment. Jesse B impresses with his JLC Polaris perpetual calendar and his vintage 1981 Jeep CJ. So much win in that picture.
Very cool.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So, I recognize that steering wheel too from my mom's like 1989 Jeep Cherokee. All right, send your wrist shots to Monday Mailbag at the1916company.com to see your pieces on these pixels. So are dress watches dead or dying? Guys, let us know in the chat box and we're going to read off your answers. But one area where dress watches are undeniably dominant, and maybe unexpectedly so, is the burgeoning independent scene. So from established powers like F.P. Journe, Gronefeld, and Grubel Forsey to upstarts like Recep Regepi and J.N. Shapiro, there is no lack of evidence that this kind of brand can both thrive and focus on dress styles even as bigger brands struggle with them. For that matter, Philippe Dufour, Roger W. Smith, and Charles Frodsham have no need for sports watches. Matt, why is this? I mean, opinions, theories, anything you got.
So yeah, this is where. So this is so funny that this is the topic of today, because dress watches. This is where I spend my time. This is the business that I do. The predominant, most of my sales are in the dress watch category. A lot of them, sure, your Journes, your Pateks, etc. But a lot of the independents that you're mentioning too. I think that the consumer is the collector, is becoming more educated to things like fine finishing, and I think that a lot of these companies are saying, you know what, we don't need excessive complications. We don't need to build bracelets. We don't need to do all of this sports watch stuff. Let's focus on small batch, highly finished, artisanal. Dress style watches on leather straps, and they seem to be doing really well.
So here's what I think is going on with the success of small upstart brands in the dress watch space. I think the first and foremost thing that we need to consider is that a lot of the early independents were heavily driven by East Asian demand, and that those were very traditional collectors. That Philippe Dufour's simplicity was allegedly designed at the behest of Japanese collectors. So this wasn't even something that necessarily came out of Europe. The idea initially was for a very conservative, high-end Japanese collector to get his dream Philippe Dufour. Because Dufour, up to that point, had done monstrous complications, like things that were endlessly complicated, like those Audemars Piguet Grande Sonnerie pocket watches that took 6,000 hours to make. So because a lot of the most sophisticated collectors in the 90s were coming out of Asia and Italy, there was this demand for things that were very traditional, which is why the early Roger Dubuis watches, the early Michel Parmigiani designed Chopard Louis Lee Chopard pieces, the F.P. Journe watches that came out of the gate in 1999, a lot of them were very conservative because the buyer was a very conservative kind of buyer. And this set this sort of set the pace, because Journe then became so influential that everyone getting started in independent watchmaking would look sideways at Journe and say, well, I'm Recep Regepi, and I didn't have a lot of success with the original oversized, complicated Acrivias. What if I just make something simple like Dufour and Journe that's a round, solid dial dress watch? And I think that the success of the early independents based on demand from East Asia and traditionalist collectors drove that more conservative dress watch style. And then also, I think a lot of the early buyers, the early adopters in the independent space, were people who were very comfortable with vintage, where dress watches dominate.
So that's what I was going to say. I think that it's a couple of things. I think it's, if I had to more accurately pinpoint why I think this phenomenon is happening, I think it's people who are comfortable with smaller case sizes. And again, we're not talking traditionally small. We're not talking 33 to 35 millimeters. We're talking a 38, 36 to 40, let's call it.
Chronometer blow size.
That's exactly right. We're talking people who are more comfortable wearing a leather strap watch casually. I think for a little while there was a little bit of if I'm wearing casual dress, it's got to be a bracelet or a rubber strap. I mean, I wear my Corne de Vache casually. I know tons of people who wear their Journes, their Langes, their Vacherons, their Pateks casually. And I also think that, man, Instagram is a beast. And the zooming in, the macro shots of fine finishing on Instagram, I don't think can be overstated. I think the effect of that cannot be overstated because collectors are valuing it. They're valuing interior angles. They're valuing anglage. They're valuing
things that we don't traditionally associate with sports watches.
That's correct. And so I think that this makes the dress watch more appealing and more desired overall.
I would agree with that. I also think that when you're dealing with a very fiercely involved clientele, these people have very specific ideas of what they want, and very few people with that cultivated a taste and that demand for something bespoke want what everyone else has. Whereas the sports watch segment tends to be very standardized.
Sure.
I would say the dress watch standard at the indie level is very non-standard, and that's what that kind of collector wants. Right. I think the mainstream collector who's going to have like one good watch might go for a sub, a 5711. He might be interested in a Royal Oak. Whereas the person who's going to have an array of like indie brands is going to want to have 6 watches that if they're not unique, at least he'll never see them in the same room.
Single-digit production or something like
exactly.
that. Right.
Like, although I will say, I went to an event in Paris 2 years ago where there were 6 Simone Brett chronometer artisans in the same room.
All of the, you'll never see this in the same room.
Yeah, right.
It goes right out the window.
To be fair.
But what room was that?
Yeah, well, Simone Brett was in the room, there was that. But yeah, I mean, I do think the guy who's buying like that indie watch wants something special.
Sure.
And not to say that these sports watches aren't special, it's just that they tend to be so popular that if you want the only one or the only one like it, you don't have a whole lot of options. That's why something like Artisan de Genève exists. I would also say that Journe himself, and this is where I'm going to give Journe a lot of credit because I often don't, but Journe has been so influential, first by far. Yes, Philippe Dufour is probably considered to be somewhat more of like the ultimate connoisseur's choice, whereas Journe is very kind of meat of the market independent. He's making 1,000 pieces a year, not like single digits. And yes, there are people like Harry Voutilainen who've been very successful from a business standpoint, building out a network of suppliers and sub-assembly components. But I think Journe is what everyone looks at today when they say, I want to start an independent brand.
So the thing about Journe, and it's going to be really, really interesting to see how these other new independents follow this trail, kind of like what you're saying. Think about the model lines that Journe has. And I don't want to go off for 20 minutes on a Journe butt-kissing session, because I will, if given free rein. Trust me, I will.
Don't worry,
love FP Journe. I know you're my balance.
We're a good team there, it's like the seesaw.
So we're going to bring some pro Journe to the show today, but think about the model lines, the CS, the Res, the Tourbillon, the Centigraph, the Optimum, you name it. Whereas a lot of these other independents have a time-only watch. Right? Maybe if in the case of Jean-Claude Biver, maybe he shot too high going for the ultra complication first. But Journe's clearly, that famous sketch on that napkin, right? Of the different pieces he wanted to make. I think that sets him apart, and man, what a tough feat to accomplish. I'm not saying it's easy for these other independent watchmakers to do something like that, but I hope that they recognize that that's part of the mastery and the brilliance as well.
The thing is, when you have someone who is just dominant in a space and is setting the trend, like look at Tesla with electric cars. It makes no sense to make your first product in this market, in the US market, in 2021, 2, or 3, a car, because everyone wants SUVs. But Lucid looked at Tesla's success and said, well, of course, our first product has to be a premium car. Why? Because that's how Tesla did it. When Ford came out with the Mustang Mach-E, the press was like, man, this thing rides terribly. Why did you do this? And they're like, well, that's how the Tesla Model Y rides. Well, so, you've got Journe, who is so successful that you have new watchmakers coming out of watchmaking school putting their name on watches. Right. They didn't put in their time, they didn't work for others, they didn't design stuff for which they were never credited. They came straight out of watchmaking school and they put their name on the watch. And Journe gave them license to do that. And for the same reason, even though I think sports watches are the majority of the market, new people in the independent space are starting with dress watches by default because that's what Journe did.
Yeah. This brings to mind one of my favorites, and someone who I want to hear your take on. Is this the right way to do it in today's market or not? Laurent Ferrier.
You know, Ferrier is an interesting case because while his name is on the dial, he has never been the creative force behind the brand. I think, if anything, he has a little bit of input and maybe he signs off at the end, but those movements are by La Fabrique du Temps, which makes beautiful movements. Almost all of the parts come from top-tier suppliers, and in the end, they're really a tablissage in the modern era. Like, a tablissage is the classic Swiss practice of specifying what the parts are going to be like and then bringing them in from suppliers and assembling them under one roof. That's how Vacheron operated for most of its first 250 years. But today it's sort of frowned upon because it puts you at the mercy of suppliers and you don't have total control. Journe makes dials, Journe makes cases, Journe makes movements, and so Journe does have that control. So with Ferrier, you've got this sort of like classicism, and I think right at the beginning of the line they were looking sideways at Dufour, they were looking at Journe, they were looking at Vaudeline, and they're like, well, this is how we have to start because it's how they start, it's how they found success. The problem, though, is now they're in the sports watch space, and when in-house your primary marketing thrust is toward a sports watch, even your own dress watches are no longer favored. I can tell you that of all the Laurent Ferrier wrist shots people have sent me in recent months, they've almost all been the sports watch. So when your own company is saying this is what's new and hot, how hard is the salesman going to push to sell the dress watch?
I don't know. I love them all. I love the sports watch. I love it from the tourbillon to the regular automatic, the dress watches, whether it's in a square case, a round case. You know, for me, speaking, maybe some people in the chat will agree with me, it's about movement finishing. And it's about that click. It's about the anglage. It's about that micro rotor, the engraving, and you know the way that they do their micro rotor. It's about the bridges. Like, that's really what Ferrier is about to me. I feel like, and the reason I bring him up is because he didn't. And I understand that the landscape wasn't nearly the same when he came out with his brand as it is now, but he put in his time at Patek Philippe. Right, and so he didn't come out of, my understanding is he wasn't a guy who came out of watchmaking school and made a brand. He obviously had a very interesting path with driving and working at Patek Philippe. And
he was like Journe, he was like Roger Dubuis, he was like Denis Flageolet. They all put in their time.
Exactly.
But I do think that it's important to mention that the most interesting Laurent Ferrier is actually sort of a hybrid dress watch, sports watch. Guys, look for the Boreal. The Boreal in steel is fantastic. Yeah. Micro rotor, double direct impulse movement, steel case, fire-like loom, absolutely awesome. That is the Ferrier watch to own. Neither dress watch nor sports watch. It's what Matt would call, you know, sort of like his steel Corne de Vache. It's like an all-arounder. It's your everyday carry. So now let's jump into the box and see what guys are saying. We have from ATH, Rolex should bring the 1908 in a steel version under 10K, not 20K in precious metal. Nobody would buy a dress watch from Rolex at 20K. Well, they're hoping that you're wrong on that, but I do agree that steel might be very compelling. I don't think it would be under 10K though. We have John D saying dress watches are on the rise as men's sartorial choices grow within the elegant casual attire category. Loungewear with a Calatrava or Traditionnel works so well. Yes, says Onair, saying 222 and climbing. Jeff S., who is one of our most prolific participants in the show, says from the AP website, standard Royal Oak 5 ATM, suitable for light swimming or showering, but not diving or high-speed water sports. We got Norm M. saying, well, he's talking about a previous conversation, and I missed the previous comment, but Mark S. saying at Norm, it's a shame people don't dress up more. I mean, we got OT joining in from Rome, and thank you for staying up late with us in continental Europe. And then Jeff saying, regarding the warranty on the Royal Oak, if you swim with it, you must have the water resistance checked yearly on that Royal Oak, especially with regular aquatic use. We got Bob Dole saying FP Journe balance is essential, and also saying he's joining us from Monument, Colorado. Cull Obsidian, wonder what Journe will call his next watch line. I'm not totally sure, but I think we're done. I don't think there will be a next Journe watch line. I think he's ready to retire from actually designing them. I think he's going to teach very, very soon. And I think that's his last chapter. And I don't deny that he's a controversial guy. What else is going on here? We got Jeff saying, looking at the Seamaster, I don't see that stipulation. Yeah, I think a Seamaster is pretty much good to go if you want to swim. Unless that sucker's like decades old, I think you're good to go.
Exactly.
And then what else is going on in the box? We got Ali Reza joining in. We're glad to have him. We got Leighton joining in saying the Laurent Ferrier's Auto Sport is so fire. Glad it has its fans.
Agreed.
And then we have Watch Antilles. Where does a VC 1921 fall in this topic? If it was ever a driver's watch, it would have been a sporting watch back then. But again, we can't seem to agree, even on this set, whether it was a driver's watch or a preacher's watch.
Hey, the truth will come out eventually. But also, that reminds me of the JLC Reverso, right? Same thing.
Yeah.
You know, polo watch. Is it a sport watch? I don't know.
Okay.
I consider it dress.
We'll address that. We'll get there. We can even see a few instances where I would say small brands have moved into sports watches, and they were accused by collectors of lowering their standards to exploit the sports watch market. So we talked about how small brands had more success in these high-end dress watches. Let's talk about a few examples where this did not work well when they moved in the other direction. Lange & Heine launched the Hector, and it was immediately hectored by those who object to the compromises that were made to hit a price point. A UWD movement, a lower price point, yes, but also lower standards of finishing, fit finish, and materials. It was a nice watch. It would have been a spectacular Zinn. But as a Lange & Heine, I was not convinced. Grubel Forsey seemingly had adopted a permanent double standard inside its catalog in order to hit a reputed 500 unit target via less richly equipped sports models, and that was including a dubious bracelet edition that I am not sold on. Hey, if you gotta have a Grubel on a bracelet, there it is. I did not love it, especially since it came from a supplier and very similar bracelets were available on other watches for less money. But however, I should say at Grubel, this has since been corrected and the brand is refocused on the founder's values. That is the back of the EWT, the Foudroyant chronograph tourbillon. And by the way, that is red hot, despite being a proto. That's a proto, meaning that's the worst they can possibly do at Grubel Forsey. Romain Gaultier similarly faced questions about how the Continuum and the subsequent C sports watch line appeared to be built to a price rather than a standard. So it's almost like with these brands like Lange & Heine, Grubel Forsey, and Romain Gaultier, you were going from like a 1980s Mercedes-Benz where they added up the cost of doing it right and then they put a profit margin on top versus a 1990s Mercedes-Benz where they're now trying to cut corners to hit a price point.
Yeah. For me, design has a lot to do with it. I think that in a few of these cases, the Lange & Heine particularly, the finishing was, I took a look at it under a loop. I did not think that it was up to their standards.
It was okay. Like I said, it would have been great from another brand that did not have a reputation as literally the best finishing in the business.
That's exactly right. Right, and obviously Grubel's right up there too. And Gaultier, first of all, I mean, we've got three right here that would be exemplary in this category. I think that it is if the design of the watch, if they're going to step into the sports watch waters, the design has to be on point. The design has to be really good, a strong, aesthetic design, because at that point it's less about the finishing and more about the Nautilus, Royal Oak, Rolex, etc. across the room. How does it look?
And I would also say, if you want to convince us that you're not just playing for the middle of the market and maximum volume, make the sports watch more exclusive. Instead of making it the most accessible piece, make it the least accessible piece. Then we know that there's real integrity behind it. I don't mean to slam that Grubel Forsey sports watch. They're nice. And if you want a water-resistant, swimmable Grubel Forsey with lume, that's the only game in town. Sure. I just felt that in terms of the standards, we were looking at a really good Richard Mille, not a classical Grubel Forsey. What else is going on in the box? John D. saying dress watches are deceptively difficult to pull off well. The simplicity and format leaves little room for proportion and finishing errors. When done right, stunning in their simplicity. We have a question from comment from Mr. Sertani. Grubel Forsey double convex is beyond grail. You won't believe what I'm doing to fit one in the collection. I understand that passion. I've done it for watches. I've done it for cars. Both of us understand that. Pocket watch time. I just want a dress watch with a unique case, shape, or style. Hey, Vacheron would be very happy to sell you a Harmony. Right. Any other really interesting? What about a first generation Roger Dubuis Sympathie?
with the shaped crystal.
Yes.
Oh,
That's a good example. Get one of those.
It's a gorgeous thing. Yep. I don't know what it costs to replace one of those crystals, but
the good news is the brand is Richemont owned, so they'll be around forever to provide the parts. Exactly.
maybe it's not
That's the advantage of buying from a big group brand.
Sure.
Neil P saying, I think dress watches are fabulous, but you really need to wear a suit for them to work. For work and pleasure, he says. When you spend your life in casual wear, then you naturally gravitate to sports watches. And we got Steve Russell saying, FP Journe Sport, good or bad example? I think that they're good sports watches. I think I wish they had more water resistance. That's my one objection. I wish that the line Sport was all universally a swimmable 100 meters. The only Journe watch that's supposedly tested beyond 30 meters is the Elegant, which also has a screw-down crown so you can swim with it. And we have Kunal saying, dress watches are the new manual transmission cars. I really like that. By the way, guys, see my parking lot that I now have in the background? That's the new Watches Tonight set backing. All 1/18th scale, and yes, that is a smart car on top of the Hummer. That's all true to life. All right, and then we have 8S saying Grand Seiko SPGY 035 is a great dress watch. Grand Seiko is different because a lot of their watches are very much everyday carry. They're neither a dress watch nor a sports watch. You'll have a watch that's on a strap with an elegant dial and no lume, but it's also got a screw-down crown and it's 100 meters. Like Grand Seiko is like its own world. It's like Australia. You see animals there that you don't see anywhere else. That's kind of like Grand Seiko. You see watches there that have no equivalents in the West. Okay, wrist shots. Go, let's fly through wrist shots number 3. Matt, lead off.
Sure. So we've got Jan. Doesn't hold back with this Fiona Kruger Purple POW from the Chaos Collection. I have never seen that watch before. I'm glad I've seen it. Matt B joins with his Seiko Willard. Very cool. And the bones of an old Douglas C-53 Warbird. Shamal D proves the smaller the watch, the greater its class, with his 1946 36mm Longines, very cool. Stephen E intrigues with his inventive EPOS triple calendar moon phase. Can barely see it, but what I see I like. And James W from Melbourne pegs the meter with his OSM Blue Side Aventurine, very cool, and Porsche 993 at the Porsche Center Workshop.
Very cool. Yeah, we love the Aventurine dial blue side, guys. Send your wrist shots to Monday Mailbag at the1916company.com to see your passion in this fashion. Okay, so our dress watch is dead or dying. Have you noticed that Heritage Acts, we were talking about this before, the Rolling Stones, Ozzy Osbourne, Metallica seem to win all the rock and metal Emmys these days? The phenomenon of aging acts winning all the awards is its own indictment of the decay of rock and roll's cultural relevance and the lack of upcoming stars in that space. After all, Greta Van Fleet can't do this all on its own. We see a similar phenomenon in the big brand dress watch space. So if you look at the most successful mainstream dress watch lines right now, they're the ones that have been around forever. The JLC Reverso, the Patek Philippe Calatrava, Cartier, Tanks and Santos, IWC Portuguese. These have been around and they will be around and they sell well, but it's very difficult to break into the space with an all-new collection that's a hit. I would argue that the last full-line blockbuster mainstream dress watch collection launch was Cartier's Ballon Bleu back in 2007, which really did hit it off and sold well globally. And it wasn't a revival or an extension of an existing line. We talked about Grand Seiko. It's a gray area since many of its watches don't fit clean category definitions. Nomos is sort of in that boat too. Tudor tried hard with the Glamour and the 1926, but those weren't Black Bay style blockbusters. Where's the freshly designed and mainstream successful dress watch model line from a major brand? Well, look, Omega relaunched the Pai-Pan Constellation with the Globemaster in 2015 and the regular Griffin Claw Connie in 2021, but I would argue, at least in the West, these are still niche products. These are not mainstream sellers. Rolex launched its Cellini dress watch reboot with the 2023 1908 Perpetual and a nice dial upgrade that came in 2024, especially with the guilloche. They're handsome, but we haven't seen any evidence that this has expanded the ranks of Rolex dress watch intenders. I also thought the old Cellinis were really nice, and now they're gone, so maybe I'm the exception. Omega Constellation and Rolex formal models are awesome watches, but who do you know that ran out to buy them?
I think people will buy them on the secondary market, and I think that's true to that's a huge
secondary market.
That's
true.
a huge conversation to have. You know, there would be in a whole nother episode. But a lot of these watches that we're talking about do really well in the secondary market. The primary market, that's where things get a little dicey. But allow me to completely derail this discussion.
Go for it.
I don't think that we need more model lines. I think that we need less. I think that we need less watches overall. I think that brands have too many SKUs, and I know this is very anti-industry of me, and I'm probably not saying, what the watch industry would like me to say, but I think fewer SKUs, fewer model lines. I think we need to pare back, and brands need to really make things more intentionally, not just do a million different colors or whatever it might be and reiterate the same thing. Again, easier said than done. I know that there's a lot of factors. There's money, there's people's jobs, there's all of these different things. But when I think about this topic and I think about all these things, I actually wish that we'd pull it back a little bit.
I can understand that. I'm always a fan of originality. I love to see something that shouldn't succeed. I would have been thrilled if somehow the Harmonies back in 2015 became a smash hit.
Sure.
Or if, somehow the Code 1159 came out with a slightly smaller case and a better set of dials out of the gate in 2019. I would love to say Audemars Piguet is no longer a company 95% dependent on one extended model line. So on that count, I like newness, but I also don't think we need more spam. So I do believe that simplifying catalogs and culling model lines is the thing to do. Sometimes if you have less to say, just say a few words, but with careful consideration. So less is more and less but better.
And I completely agree with you. You said it perfectly. And also I would say when, now we're going to get way out there, but
that's okay.
But
we got all the time in the world, just YouTube,
But human history is going to be a long, long time. And if Patek wants to only make complications and grand complications for the next 100 years, I'm fine with that. I'm not going to be around to see all of them, but they're coming out, like we said, with these watches, and I use Patek as an example, but all of these brands, if they do something well, they do it intentionally, even if it doesn't have a new name or a new model line name. I'm fine with them continuing to do the right thing within those confines.
All right, so let us take a look at some really cool dress watches. But I think it's important to recognize that dress watches, Matt was talking about pre-owned, they can be really cool on a pre-owned basis because, yes, it's true. They're kind of like buying a Jaguar. There's going to be a lot of depreciation on a Jaguar. There's going to be a lot of depreciation on a dress watch. But my goodness, is the hardware impressive. This is the original 2007 Duomet chronograph. Solid dial, foudroyant, coaxial seconds hands, one for the chrono, one for the time of day. 2 power reserve indicators, a case built like a Lange because it has a movement in German silver like a Lange. So we have these double barrels and you double the power supply when you activate the chronograph. So with 2 separate powertrains, 2 separate power supplies, when you activate the chrono, you lose neither power reserve nor balance amplitude. I owned the white gold model for 4 years. It's an absolute dream and it was the most accurate mechanical watch I've ever owned. Now going through the 5160, this actually is the 5160 and the second of them, so this is the 500G. So this is Patek's second pass at a fully engraved officer's case retrograde perpetual calendar. So that's the dial, that's the case, that's the lugs. If you look closely, it's even the screws fixing the strap. You can see the crown's been engraved. And this is one of the few Patek watches that has a model-specific buckle, which is also itself engraved. On the reverse, the epitome of elegance. I'm going to do my best to capture this. We're still working on the lighting. But this watch is only 38 millimeters in diameter. You can see it's got an automatic movement inside, and then there's this sort of laurel engraving around the movement. It's absolutely stunning. And again, not a big watch at 38 millimeters. This is a bigger watch, but the space is well used. From a Lange und Söhne, we've got the Dotograph Perpetual. So turn it all over, and this is the stuff dreams are made of. German silver from Germany, layers. We have a perpetual calendar. We have a flyback chrono. Matt, what do you think of when you see this? Because I know this is right up your alley.
Yeah, Datograph Up-Down is my grail watch. This is even that on steroids, obviously, with the addition of the Perpetual. You're probably noticing the, as you say, world-class chronograph feel right there.
Yeah.
It's tremendous. Everybody says it's a little city on the back when you look at the movement, and that is the best way to describe it, I think.
And I think the great thing about this watch is it's a little bit of a sleeper. Like if you want an Odysseus, you're going to pay through the nose. But if you want one of these, you're going to get a very fair price in relation to what it originally cost. And with lume on the dial, it's more practical than you might think. Okay, so this is from out of nowhere, because this came out in 2017 at SIHH. 7-day power reserve, bubble sapphire. It has a conical date indicator where you have superimposed, vertically stacked double-digit date. And then we've got this little memory device that sits on the dial where you have alternately a sapphire and this little thing right here. You have a sapphire and you have a diamond, and the presence of one rather than the other is supposed to be a memory device. Then we have this incredible stack of mainsprings right over the top that allows us to get 7 days of power reserve. This is the Christophe Claret Maestro with this unique micrometric regulator on a free-sprung balance, and you can see like 1/3 of the thickness of the watch, maybe more, is that bubble sapphire. You can have a lot of fun with used dress watches, and that's what I wanted to emphasize right here. That is a good time. Do you have a favorite between those three? Or four, I should say? Since we did have four.
I mean, I gotta go with the Datograph Perpetual, but here's the honorable mention to, well, first of all, the Claret's use of any sort of conical feature. That reminds me of the new Grubel the Power Reserve, on the Handmade too. But the old Duomet is so good, and they took away the German silver.
Yeah, they did. The new one has a rhodium-plated brass movement, which is like, I mean, I get it. Harmonizing production process because, you know, sure. But yeah, I know, I agree with you right
when
there.
I saw that in the release, I was like, oh no. So I would say the Datograph, but the Duomet is a wonderful honorable mention because the movement is stunning, and I love to see JLC done like that.
Of what's on the table, for me, it's going to be the 51-6500G, unless the Duomet is white gold, in which case I literally did own that watch, so I can't claim I wouldn't buy it. We have a question about Naoya Hida. Naoya Hida came from retail and created his own brand using parts sourced from high-end suppliers. Great watches, a couple of collaborations with the Armory, which worked out really nicely. Interesting Japanese brand focused on very traditional styles. I think if you like mid-century Patek Philippe Calatravas, you'll really like Naoya Hida. All right. Great to hear from all of you guys. Great to see the sound off in the chat box. And I want to really thank Matt for taking the time to do this, because this is a big drag on a guy's day when he's got to both work the phones and appear on camera. Also want to thank my crew back there. We got Nick on the switcher, and thanks to all of you who make the best job in the business possible. Until next time, Tim out, Matt out, and thanks for logging on.